The house on Cedar Lane was a museum of our happiness, each room a carefully curated exhibit. My husband Thomas was the historian, the gentle curator. He documented our life with a scholar's devotion. Framed tickets from our first opera, a shadow box holding the cork from our wedding champagne, a bookshelf where every first edition was a milestone from our travels. He could tell you the provenance of every quilt, the story behind each piece of folk art on our whitewashed walls. Our love was a beautifully preserved thing, quiet, stable, and displayed under perfect, dustless glass. Elara was the docent, guiding us through our own history with a practiced smile. I mistook the profound peace for passion, the orderly cataloging of joy for joy itself. My own work was preservation of a different sort. I was a paper conservator, working at the Morgan Library, tending to the fragile, fading letters of long-dead poets and revolutionaries. My world was one of silent concentration, of scalpels and Japanese tissue, of bringing ghosts back to legibility. At home, Thomas would ask about my day, and I would speak of vellum and iron gall ink, and he would listen with genuine interest, filing the information away in the mental cabinet labeled Ilera's work. He knew the names of my favorite solvents, but I sometimes wondered if he saw the loneliness that could settle in the quiet spaces between words on a centuries-old love letter. I met Leo in the stark, fluorescent-lit break room of the Morgan, a space that felt like an affront to the treasures we cared for. He was a new hire in the digital archiving department, tasked with scanning the very documents I repaired. He was spilling coffee from a paper cup onto a printout of a 15th century musical score, cursing vividly under his breath. "Blot, don't rub," I said automatically, handing him a wad of paper towels from the dispenser. "Rubbing grinds the particulate in." He looked up, his eyes a startling shade of green-gray, like sea glass. "Particulate," he repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a face that seemed inherently unpreserved, a faint scar through one eyebrow, stubble that looked perpetually a day old, an energy that vibrated against the hushed atmosphere. "Right. Sorry, I'm Leo. I'm apparently a danger to history. Ilara and history survived worse." I took the stained printout from him. The coffee had bled across the staves, creating a strange, accidental modern art overlay on the medieval notation. "See? Now it's a collaboration between a 15th century monk and a 21st century klutz with a Starbucks habit." He laughed, a real unguarded sound that seemed too loud for the room. "I like that. The chaos of now meeting the order of then. That's what I'm here for, supposedly, to bridge that gap. Though currently I'm just making a mess." That was the first fissure in my glass case, a hairline crack from a too loud laugh. He saw my work not as sacred, sterile preservation, but as a dialogue across time, full of potential for messy, interesting collisions. We began to orbit each other in the labyrinth of the library. He'd seek me out with questions that were not really about work. "This love letter from Keats," he'd say, leaning over my shoulder in the conservation lab, his presence a warm disturbance in the climate-controlled air. "Do you think the ink is faded from time, or from being read too many times in secret? Or, this battle map, see how the cartographer's hand shakes here, by the forest? Was he afraid of the terrain, or of the men waiting in it?" Thomas asked about conditions and techniques. Leo asked about fear and desire. He peered past the document to the human hand that created it, and in doing so, he began to peer past my professional veneer into the woman beneath. The first betrayal was intellectual, a theft of mental space. I found myself thinking of his questions during my commute, drafting answers in my head. I started reading the documents I was conserving not just for damage, but for the secrets in their phrasing, the emotions in their flourishes, trying to see them through his eyes. When Thomas asked about my day over our organic, locally sourced dinner, I would give my standard report, but my mind was replaying a conversation about the hidden eroticism in Renaissance penmanship guides. The second betrayal was temporal. Leo asked if I wanted to see something actually interesting. A friend of his was DJing at a tiny, sticky-floored club in Brooklyn that played vinyl only. Music from the 40s to the 80s with no logic. "It's chaos. Wonderful chaos," he said. I told Thomas I had a late conservation emergency, a flood alert in a manuscript vault. The lie was a cold, smooth stone in my pocket. The club was a sensory assault after the library's silence. The air was thick with sweat and spilled beer. The music a glorious, jarring mosaic. Billie Holiday crashing into talking heads. Leo moved with an unself-conscious rhythm, his eyes closed, a smile of pure absorption on his face. He didn't try to dance with me. He just pulled me into the chaos beside him. In the pulsating dark, surrounded by strangers, I felt a shocking, exhilarating surge of aliveness. I wasn't Ilara the conservator or Ilara Thomas's wife. I was a body in motion, a laugh ripped from my throat by a surprise guitar riff. When we stumbled out into the cold early hours, ears ringing, he bought us greasy street meat from a halal cart. "See," he said, juice from the lamb running down his chin. "Sometimes you have to stop preserving life and just let it stain you." The ride home was a descent from Technicolor back to sepia. I scrubbed the smell of smoke and fried onions from my skin in the shower. But a ghost of the energy remained, a hum in my bones that felt alien in our serene bedroom. The physical affair began several weeks later, in his sun-drenched, book-choked apartment in Astoria. It was the antithesis of our minimalist, curated home. Books were piled on the floor, records spilled from crates, a half-assembled motorcycle engine sat on a tarp in the living room. It was a place where things were used, lived in, happened. His touch was nothing like Thomas's predictable, tender affection. It was inquisitive, demanding, a little rough. He kissed me as if he were trying to learn a new language by taste alone. Afterwards, lying amidst the chaos, he would trace the lines on my palm and tell me wild, improbable stories about my past lives. A pirate queen, a silent film star, a baker who poisoned a tyrannical lord. "You have old hands," he murmured once, "but your eyes are desperate for a new story." With Thomas, my story was already written, beautifully bound and placed on a shelf. With Leo, I was a manuscript with blank pages left, and he was a reckless, compelling scribe. I became a master forger of my own life. I maintained two impeccable records: the official ledger, doctor's appointments, dinner parties with Thomas's academic colleagues, reminders to water the orchid in the conservatory. The secret encrypted log, L, discuss neoclassical marginalia, or A, vinyl hunting. The latter meant his apartment. I developed a forensic-level attention to detail. I kept a change of library clothes in my locker, a simple scent-free outfit I could change into after leaving Leo's, to avoid carrying the smell of his apartment, his cigarettes, his skin, back to Cedar Lane. I used a separate perfume, a cheap drugstore rose water, only when I was with him, so its absence at home wouldn't be noted. I was preserving my marriage by meticulously erasing all evidence of its betrayal. The guilt was a corrosive acid I learned to carry. It ate at me most during Thomas's unconscious kindnesses. When he surprised me with tickets to a lecture on my favorite Baroque composer, when he spent a weekend meticulously restoring my grandmother's rocking chair, when he talked about our future, about adopting a child, about building a legacy. "A family is the ultimate act of preservation, Alara," he'd say, his hand warm over mine, "passing on love like a cherished heirloom." His words, so full of his good, steady heart, would feel like physical blows. I began to manufacture distance, picking fights about his fastidiousness, about the sterile perfection of our home, calling it a mausoleum in a heated moment. I was trying to paint his stability as suffocation, to retrospectively justify the wild, wrecking ball swing I'd taken at our lives. One afternoon, in the cocoon of Leo's messy bed, I shattered. A particularly vivid memory of Thomas Him patiently teaching me to identify bird calls on a hiking trip years ago flooded me, and I started to cry. Great, heaving sobs of shame. "I'm a terrible person. He's good, and I'm here, lying in our filth." Leo didn't get angry. He propped himself on an elbow, his face serious. "This isn't filth, Alara. This is life. Real, messy, complicated life. You spent so long in a museum, you forgot what the outside air smells like, even when it smells like garbage sometimes. You're not terrible. You're awake, and waking up is a violent process." He reframed my deceit as a painful rebirth. I clutched at that narrative. It was the only flotation device in my sea of guilt. The double life was a constant, exhausting performance. I bought a burn phone, a cheap, prepaid thing I kept hidden in the false bottom of my conservation toolbox. I became paranoid about time, about alibis overlapping, about a stray thread or hair. My sleep, once deep and dreamless, became fractured with nightmares of being trapped in a glass display case, while Thomas and Leo looked in from opposite sides, or of the precious documents I cared for dissolving into ash under my fingertips. The strain began to show. I became absent-minded at home, forgetting the name of Thomas's colleague we'd had dinner with for years, putting salt in his coffee instead of sugar. A deep, permanent fatigue settled behind my eyes. Thomas noticed. The historian in him began to observe the discrepancies, the erasures in my personal record. "You seem elsewhere lately, my love," he said one evening, looking up from cataloging a new collection of antique maps he'd acquired. "Is it work? That new digital archivist? He seems to take up a lot of your mental space." The observation was so acute it stole my breath. "Leo, he's just enthusiastic, asks a lot of questions." "It's nothing." I busied myself with wiping a non-existent spot off the glass coffee table. Thomas was silent for a long moment, studying me as if I were a newly acquired portrait whose authenticity he was beginning to doubt. "I see," he said softly. It was not an acceptance, but an annotation, a question mark in the margin of our story. The crisis came from an unexpected source, a document. I was conserving a bundle of intensely personal letters from a Victorian woman to a lover who was not her husband. The writing was desperate, lyrical, full of coded references and agonized guilt. One line burned itself into my brain. "I have built a secret room for you in the attic of my heart, and I visit it in the dark watches of the night, though the dust of my deception chokes me." I felt as if the long-dead woman had reached across time and slit me open. I was so shaken I made a rare tiny tear in the fragile paper with my scalpel. That night I couldn't bear the perfection of Cedar Lane. I told Thomas I had a migraine, that I needed to lie down in the dark. Instead, I texted Leo from my burn phone. "Need to see you, now." He was at his usual spot, a dive bar near his apartment. I found him at the counter, arguing amiably about baseball with the bartender. When he saw my face, his smile faded. He led me to a back booth. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, the words raw. "It's killing me. That woman's letters. It's like she's accusing me from the grave." He listened, then took my hands in his. They were warm, slightly sticky from the bar. "Elara, listen to me. You're not her. You're not trapped in some Victorian tragedy. You have a choice. You're choosing life. Yeah, it's messy, it hurts, but it's real. What you have at home, that's a beautiful exhibit, but it's not living. Don't let guilt fossilize you." He made it sound so simple, so noble, a choice between life and a museum diorama. In that moment, in the grimy booth, with his hands on mine, and the smell of stale beer, I chose him. I chose the mess. I went back to his apartment, and our coupling that night was fierce, almost angry, a desperate attempt to outrun the ghost of the Victorian woman and the living, kind man waiting in my curated house. I returned home at 3 a.m., my body aching, my soul scoured. The house was dark, but the light in Thomas's study was on. My heart plummeted. I walked in, prepared to spin a tale of a sudden, miraculous recovery and a late-night walk. He was sitting at his wide oak desk, the one that had belonged to his grandfather. He wasn't working. He was just sitting, still as a statue. Laid out before him on the green blotter, like archaeological finds, were several objects. The cheap rosewater perfume from my purse, a matchbook from Leo's dive bar, stamped with a logo I knew he'd recognize from a story I'd once told him about a work drink with colleagues. And my burn phone, its black plastic casing looking sinister and cheap against the aged leather. He had not opened the phone. He hadn't needed to. The context was enough. "The attic," he said, his voice hollow, stripped of all its usual warmth. It was the sound of a vault door closing forever. "I couldn't find the deed for the Vermont property. I thought it might be in one of your old boxes." You've always been messy with paperwork. He gestured to the items, his hand trembling slightly. I found your secret room, Ilara. The world stopped. The carefully preserved house seemed to hold its breath. All I could hear was the frantic, dying flutter of my own heart. Who is he? The question was not a roar, but a whisper of immense weariness. It demanded the final piece of data to complete a horrifying thesis. There was no preservation left to do, no restoration possible for this moment. I gave him the unvarnished, ugly truth. Leo, the library, the club, the apartment, the lies, the excuses, the burn phone, the perfume. I did not spare myself a single shameful detail. As I spoke, I witnessed the deconstruction of Thomas's world. His face, usually a map of quiet intelligence, crumpled through disbelief into a pain so profound it seemed to alter the very air in the room. I hadn't just broken a vow. I had proven that his life's work, the careful, loving curation of our shared history, was based on a fraudulent artifact, me. When my voice finally gave out, he stood. He walked to the bookshelf, to a framed photograph of us in Rome, standing before the Trevi Fountain. He took it down, looked at it for a long moment, then placed it face down on the shelf. I am a historian, he said, still facing the shelves. My whole life is dedicated to understanding the past, to preserving its truth. Authenticity is everything. Provenance is everything. He turned and his eyes were dry but shattered. You have been a forgery, a beautiful, convincing forgery I built my life around. Every memory from the last year is now suspect. Every smile, every touch, every quiet moment. Was it real? Or was it you performing, preserving the facade while you built your secret room? He shook his head, a slow, final movement. I can't live with a forgery, Ilara. A museum built on a fake is a house of cards. It has to close. He left that night. His packing was not rushed, but it was definitive. He took his personal research, his grandfather's fountain pen, a few changes of clothes, and the face-down photograph from Rome. He left the house, the furniture, every single curated object of our life together. I don't want any of it, he said at the door, his bag in his hand. It's all part of the exhibit, and the exhibit is over. The aftermath was a slow, meticulous deaccessioning. Thomas communicated only through a stern, efficient lawyer. The divorce was a clinical division of assets. He was relentlessly fair, which was its own kind of agony. My father, a retired museum director who adored Thomas, was devastated. You didn't just break his heart, Ilara, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. You vandalized a masterpiece. His trust in you was his most precious piece, and you shattered it. Weeks after the separation, I went to the dive bar. I needed to see Leo, to grasp the thing for which I had traded my world. He was there with a group of laughing people I didn't know. He saw me, detached himself, and came over. His hug was brief, his attention already drifting back to his friends. Hey, you okay? That was rough stuff, he said, his tone sympathetic but distant. I don't know what to do now, I admitted, feeling utterly lost. He shoved his hands in his pockets. Look, Ilara, you're an amazing woman, but this thing between us? It was a moment, a beautiful, chaotic moment. But I'm not a forever guy. I'm a right now guy. And I think you need to figure out your right now without all this. He gestured between us. I'm heading to Portland next month. A new gig. The fire that had burned down my marriage was, for him, a campfire he was already walking away from, warmed and ready to move on. I was not his partner in chaos. I had been a temporary visitor to it. I quit my job at the Morgan. I could no longer bear the silence, the proximity to fragile truths. I moved to a small anonymous apartment in a different borough. I took a job as a graphic designer for a corporate firm, my work now consisting of making soulless PowerPoint templates and newsletter layouts. My hands, trained to repair the whispers of centuries, now clicked a mouse. The house on Cedar Lane sold quickly. I packed away the museum of our life myself. Each object felt like a relic from a civilization I had destroyed. I kept nothing. Now I live in a space with white walls and no history. There are no curated shelves, no shadow boxes. The silence here is not peaceful, it is total, a void. Sometimes in the deepest part of the night, I wake up thinking I hear the soft, meticulous sound of Thomas cataloging something in the next room, or Leo's laugh from a dream. But there is only silence. I sought to escape a museum for a wild living world. But in destroying the exhibit, I failed to secure a real place in the chaos. Leo was a season, Thomas was the climate, and I am now a woman without a habitat, a ghost suspended between the beautifully preserved past I annihilated and the vibrant fleeting present that had no place for me. I am the curator of my own emptiness, preserving only the profound, unending silence that follows the shattering of glass.